Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of CTO Craft Bytes. Today, we're going to enjoy a fireside chat with David Subar. If this is your first time at a CTO Craft Bytes event, let me tell you a little bit about the group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. There are over 7,000 members, and CTO Craft provides one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events like this one. So if you're not already a member and are interested in becoming one, enjoying events like these, then I will post some links for you here to sign up. Special thanks to our headline partner, AWS, for making these events possible. My name's Dan Smith, for those of you who don't know me. I'm an executive coach. I perform technical and product due diligence in the M&A space. My guest today is David Subar. He's a former CTO and Chief Product Officer. David is managing partner of Interna, a consultancy that enables technology companies to ship better products faster, align product and engineering teams, achieve product market fit more quickly, and deploy capital more efficiently. He's worked with companies from small startups right up to the Walt Disney Company. Welcome, David.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So the audience, I'd like to ask you for a favor. We're going to be covering topics ranging from effective team collaboration and alignment, getting support as a CTO, and David's going to share some lessons he's learned as a CTO coach. But what we'd really like you to do is ask the questions that you'd like to have answered. So if you look down the bottom there, there's an Ask a Question button. Please get typing, and I will endeavor to read all your questions. I think also there's a function to vote. So if you like the question and vote it, then it should shoot up to the top of my screen, which will help me to identify it. Okay, so let's kick off, David. It's great to have you here. Maybe you can tell us, in your experience, what has and hasn't worked when aligning product and engineering teams.
I will. Let me give a little more context on my background so people can understand where I'm coming from. I think you mentioned I've been CTO and Chief Product Officer of a number of different companies. Interna, which is I've been doing, or it's been around for the last 9 years. We've been doing it for the last 9 years. We do coaching like you. We do deep dive into product management engineering. So we see a lot of different teams and a lot of different team sizes, dynamics that work and don't work. We do fractional work, right? So we are able to dig in, and we do diligence also like you for PE firms, VC firms, that kind of thing. So we see a lot of different kinds of things, company sizes, different stages. But there are some things that remain true, no matter any of those criteria. What industry you're in, B2B, if you're B2B, also if you're B2C, size, which is things tend to work best when people have an aligned mission. If engineers think their job is primarily about writing code, I write good code, I do good architecture, our algorithms, are all log in. If that's important, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Same with product managers. If they think their job is about writing user stories, and that's it, and they just throw them over the fence to the engineers, bad things tend to happen. If, on the other hand, both groups think we're here to serve a customer, and what we're building either does or doesn't serve that customer, then they'll tend to get aligned. Mm-hmm. And so that's the key, is having the teams, or the team, actually, I like to think of them as one team, product management engineering, know who they serve and have a joint mission in doing that, which has a bunch of implications about what code do you build, what features do you build, how do you build it, how much do you invest in architecture, how do I think about it, how do I learn about how all it has implications in all those places. And I'm glad to talk about what each of those means specifically, but fundamentally, it's about who we serve.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And maybe we can dig into later to some of those in more detail. There's obviously a lot in there. So what have been the best ways that you've found to help teams to be effective?
So, I mean, the best ways is we do start with that motivation. Do you know who you serve? And and it doesn't actually start with product management engineering, although it has to be there. It starts with the company. It starts with the CEO, and the CEO in the company having a reason to be. And so we start by asking that, and we see if there's a consensus or not. Then we go and we look at, okay, great. Now that we know who we serve, what's on the roadmap and why? Both. Do you know what's on the roadmap, and do you know why it's there? Is it specific? Is it measurable? And there's a formula that we use, but there's other formulas you can use that, and I'm glad to share the formula. As far as how do you consider everything on the roadmap, as far as whether it should or shouldn't be there, and whether you know whether it's there. And then are you measuring not just sprint velocity or whatever development methodology you use, but are you measuring the efficacy of things after they get released? And does everyone know? Engineers can do things a number of different ways. You could code things a whole bunch of ways. And good engineers in particular, will tend to pick what methods that are good methods. But often it's good engineering methods. But if they know the context of the why, they'll tend to pick things that help expand the product appropriately. So we ask all those questions. We ask engineers, do you know why you're doing this? Scrum, by the way, does this really well with user stories, about how asking a particular user story, why somebody's doing, why somebody wants this user story, isn't particularly great at pulling up the product level. It's silent on that. And so one of the things we do is we make sure we ask the engineers why it is. And then we do the standard stuff and ask questions about architecture, right? Architecture still matters. Algorithms still matter, right? But I want the engineers to be so engaged. They're asking product managers why, not just why we're doing this, but hey, I could do what you're asking me to. And that's going to take 3 weeks. We could do that. But here's something else we could do that will get you 80% of the way there, and just will take a few days. And I think this makes sense because of that, right? I want them to be engaged with not just being a receptacle of things but being engaged with. I want them to be missionaries, not mercenaries, right? And I want, by the way, product managers should feel the same way about engineering. Tell me about the architecture. Could we do this or that? Right? That's healthy. And so we don't see that. We start asking why, and we dig into what prevents it. Could be org design structure. I could tell you about stuff at some of the companies. It could be just company culture. It could be process, right? It could be architecture. There's architecture. We have one client where there's architectural issues that create bottlenecks that prevent this kind of conversation, but it could be a lot of things. That's where we start digging in.
Great. Thanks, David. All right, I see one question's come in. The rest of you are being a little bit shy, so please do ask questions. And if it's something more specific as well, like David's mentioned, things he's experienced, obviously we're not in a confidential environment, but if you wanted to do something more situation-based, feel free to add the questions. So please do keep them coming. I just wanted to go back there, David. You mentioned about the CEO, and something I'm quite often asked and quite often comes up in the circles that I run is about CTOs who are not necessarily aligned with themselves. So they tend to go in one direction and then maybe U-turn and then turn left. How do you how does a technology and product team deal with that? Is it a lost cause, or what can you suggest as to help in that kind of situation?
CEOs that change, you're saying, or CTOs that
Yeah,
change?
CEOs.
Yeah. So this is difficult, right? Or this can be difficult. There's often CEOs who have shiny object problem, right? Here's the thing I've thought about today, and it's great. We should do this. And yesterday there was another idea, and the day before there was a different idea, and the day before there's a different idea. I actually, when I was CTO for one company, I had this exact situation. It's sadly not uncommon, and there's a couple ways of dealing with it. This is actually a place where a third party is really helpful. Having someone either coach the CEO or looking at product management engineering and having an ear of the CEO. But if you don't have that, the situation I had was much like this. And there was two things that that we did. You often find the CEO in this case is doing this not just to product management engineering, but might be doing it to sales and to marketing and to other departments. And so making your colleagues your friends in solving this and having this joint conversation, having a joint conversation with the CEO or several independent conversations tends to be helpful. But what I said to this particular CEO was, Keith was brilliant. I said, Keith, this is a great idea. This is actually your fifth great idea this week. Help me understand how to stack this against your other great ideas. And I started engaging the conversation with this, this is interesting, what do you think? Why we do this? Now, oftentimes what I see as answers in these situations from the CEO is, I heard this thing, like the market's shifting this way. I heard this thing, so we should just go do it. That's, and so the idea I want to get to the CEO to is grounding them in some kind of recognized truth, right? Whether that's be data or not. There's a problem I'm going to bring up in a second, and I try to get them that. This is where the conversations with the other executives help, and this is also in particular with the chief product officer and the CTO together is particularly helpful. And you can also talk about outcomes, like, okay, we're 3/4 away of doing this project that we think is going to have this impact. So let's not talk about the sunk cost. That's not interesting. But we're now like 3 weeks from delivering this thing that we think has this potential outcome. The thing you just told me about is going to take 6 weeks or 4 weeks to get that potential outcome. Do you think, how do we weigh this? If this is so important that we want to spend the extra time, the 6 weeks versus 3 that's remaining, then we should do it. I got no problem with that. But let's have the conversation about what the weight of these things, relative weight of these things are. With Keith, he heard the message from a lot of the executives, and over time, it's not something that gets fixed in a day or a week. He, smart guy. He said, I'm hearing this a bunch of different places. Maybe I should consider it. And he did reform, but it took a while.
And I like the way that you said, they're all good ideas. So really encouraging rather than a kind of negative way. So that's really encouraging to find a solution. So,
yep.
Yeah. All right, great. We've got a couple of questions, so do keep them coming in, and don't forget you can also vote on them. So I think, I just voted on that one. So vote on the ones you like. So Megan's asking, what should people look for when picking a CTO coach? With remote coaching, how can you help foster a relationship when you're not able to meet face-to-face, especially with time differences?
Yeah. So none of the people that we coach are local. So in picking a CTO coach, first of all, I would say, do they have a methodology that rings true to you? I'll tell you what we do in a minute. That's the first thing I would look at.
Mm-hmm.
Second is, do they have experience in coaching and experience in what you're doing? I think you want a good coach, someone who has the skills to coach, but also to the extent that they have been a CTO before, done what you've done before, they're going to be able to give you some pointers.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing is chemistry, right? So methodology, experience as a coach, experience in your area, and chemistry. I would say those are the four most important things.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we think about methodology. And we go and say, where is it that you want to get to? What are your goals? And we start and we list those. Then we go and we do a 360. We say, what do the people around you say are your strengths and your weaknesses and the things you should work on?
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the second stage. Then we triangulate those. Here's what you said about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what the environment said about you. And let's revisit your goals and see if there's anything you want to change.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer could be no, but it's frequently yes. And then we set out on a roadmap, okay, here are the goals, but here are the steps you want to take to succeed in those goals. We put them on a roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
And then every time we talk about how did those things go? And we also talk about what happened. What ad hoc thing happened that wasn't directed to the goals that you want to have a conversation about? And we take you through the steps, and like all good agile processes, at the end of a certain time period, for us it's typically 6 months, we'll say, let's pop the stack. Let's look at where are you against your goals, and then let's repeat the process.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the methodology we use. Other people use different methodologies. We've all been CTOs and chief product officers, as we said, so it's not surprising we retro everything we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time we've honed the methodology, and this seems to work really well. So that's the methodology. Second is, tell me about some examples you've been coaching. You obviously can't tell confidential stuff, but how does that work? How do you think about? Can you give me some examples? Third is, what have you learned in sitting in this seat? If you've done this job before, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The key there's a big difference between teaching and coaching. And we hold that you want to have someone who's generally more of a coach than a teacher. A teacher will tell you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know how to do it, you want someone to tell you. And having those skills, if there's an area that you're completely unfamiliar with, having someone who can be a teacher as well is helpful. But we hold that maybe that's a quarter of the conversations, maybe a quarter. And the rest is coaching, which is about asking questions. And so we try to ask intelligent questions based on what our experience was and based on what we feel the person that we're coaching will work best for that person. It's better for the person to discover themselves what the answer is than to be told what the answer is. And so that's why we favor coaching over teaching. But but with people that we coach, if someone just says, I have no idea what to do here, we can say, well, let me show you examples. Like the situation I mentioned with Keith. Like, here's some examples of places that we've faced this and how we've handled that. How would that work for you? And the last thing is just chemistry. How does it feel with this person? Can I be forthright with this person? Can I, do I think this person is going to be a good partner for me in my journey?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are what I would look for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I agree with you on all of those points, especially and I guess I call it mentoring instead of teaching, which is, we could probably have a whole separate discussion on the meaning of those. But I guess the way I see it is I want to hear what the client is thinking and doing, him or herself, and then potentially some offerings, so some extra things. Have you thought about this? Would looking at this be appropriate? And then see where that goes. But I agree that it's, as a coach, we don't know what living life is like as that person. We don't know what working in their company is. We only have some insights from what we pick up. So they're the experts in it, and we're helping them to become clearer about what challenges they're facing and how to achieve their goals. Absolutely agree with you there.
Sometimes on that, I think it's a very excellent point. Sometimes on that, we'll do some role playing. So let's say you're the person we're coaching. You are the CEO. What would you think the CEO would react to if you said this? Or let's you be you and I'll be the CEO. And so walking through situations, sometimes these situations are very fraught, right? And they seem scary, but they're not actually dangerous, right? And so having that conversation and doing some of that role playing through a process when it's dealing with the CEO or dealing with the board has to be helpful. If it's going down and looking at architectures and things like that, well, then those things don't need that kind of practice. But we can say, here's some things that we're seeing in the market that seem to be appropriate. These may or may not be appropriate. So it's very different whether you're helping someone look up, helping someone look at technology things that you don't have to be sensitive to, thinking about how they deal with their personnel, the people that report to them, which you do need to be sensitive to, but your role is very different. Someone that reports to you versus someone you report to.
Great points there. And I definitely also agree about the chemistry. I think that's really important. Right, we have another question in from Peter. How to implement a cross-functional collaborative culture, that's quite hard to say, in the environment where tech is not considered as equal partner to the product, being treated more like an implementation partner or assembly line. In your experience, have you learned what methodologies, frameworks work best in environments like that?
I don't know if Peter can respond. Here's Peter, if you can respond to this. Is this a company? Is this a technology company? B, is technology a cost center or a profit center? Or is it, in the case it is maybe a different way to say it, in the case it's a product company, a technology product company, is technology the cost center or considered a profit center? And then lastly, I'll ask the last question. Is this a B2B company or a B2C company?
I think Peter should be, there we go. He's writing into the
media streaming company. Okay. So it's clearly a technology company. Is this streaming to consumers or streaming to corporations? Is it an infrastructure tools company? B2C. Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. The good news about being in a B2C company, if you're in technology, is that you are directly aligned to revenue generation generally. I need to know more about your company. It's not appropriately for me to ask in this environment, but the things that you do, and you know this, can tweak the revenue, can tweak the profitability. But you find yourself, and this is not uncommon, you find yourself in a position where they're asking you to be mercenaries, not missionaries. Just do this thing and I will pay you. Don't worry about the why, just do this thing. Shut up, do this thing, right? And the question I would have, is that being driven by the person who runs product or the CEO? Who is creating this environment? To the extent it's the person running the product and not the CEO, then I would, and Peter, I'm glad to have an offline conversation with you about this longer and more in depth, and spend half an hour with you talking about it. I'm no problem doing that. Dan will give my contact information at the end if you're interested. Just reach out. I'll glad to do it. Speak with this. I would have a conversation with the CEO and say, my team, I would have that same thing that I said before, is my team has multiple ways of doing anything. And we're losing our ability to have them engaged and choose the right thing because we don't know they don't know the why, and they can't engage in the why. And the second problem that I have, CEO, is that engineers all have a choice in jobs. Even in this recession we're in, they have a choice of places to go, and someone else is going to offer them more money. We know that. Maybe some, Facebook or Google or Amazon, someone else will offer them more money if they're good. And so we need something that keeps them here that's intangible. And the intangible thing that we have is this product and the why, and we want them engaged in that. And because if we have a cool product and we're in a cool market, that's when they can't get something somewhere else. And so if we want to decrease churn, personnel churn, we want them engaged. But there's some other reason we want them, is that they know things that product manager doesn't know because they're closer to product. So that's if it's the product, that's if the chief product officer that is creating this issue. And there may be org design issues and alignment and who reports to whom, and to think about there. If it's the CEO, actually, two cases, the CEO and the chief product officer agrees with the CEO, or the CEO and the chief product officer does not. Let's do that latter case first. Then make the chief product officer your buddy and start having the conversations just among you in a small scale. You can't do it in a big scale yet, in a small scale. And as you show success in that, then you'll be more and more empowered. Stephen Covey had this thing: when working for a micromanager, do everything the micromanager suggests, and then do a little more. Just do a little more that isn't asked, and to the extent you're provided value, it behooves the person that you've done a little more for to give you more and more power over time. Once again, this is a slow game. If the chief product officer and the CEO agree that you're meant to be an order taker and that's it, I would still suggest that do a little more, but you've got to make one of those people your buddies. If at the end of the day you can't move either of them, you might have a job decision to make. Not everything is fixable, but generally there's one of those two that you can crack, right? And one of those two that it's a little easier to crack the chief product officer than the CEO generally, right? Because they have direct benefit. They can see how the teams work together generally better than the CEO. But so those are one of those two. I will tell you, this is even harder when your CEO is just a pure salesperson, right? And just looking at the revenue from right now, right? That's harder. And you might have a cultural problem. And if you have that case, you might have a cultural problem that's not easily fixable. That's not fixable. Let me say it that way. So I hope that was helpful. Once again, right. Peter, if you want to chat afterwards, just reach out.
Yeah, and I will post the David's contact details towards the end in case you want to do that. Right, that was an excellent answer, David. Let's have a look. We have a couple more questions coming in. So we have one here about keeping up to date. It's hard to keep up to date with the latest technical updates. Because of this, should a CTO have more than one coach, one for business management support and another for technical support? So can you get too much support as a CTO?
Sure. Gee, if you have the time and the capital to pay for two. Actually, I was going to say, sure, go ahead and do it. I suppose if you have enough time and enough capital to pay for two, sure. And then you're going to want the two of them to every so often have conversations among them or between them. When we coach, when we have multiple coaches in the same company, we typically, one person coaching one person coaching someone else. Those coaches will talk confidentially about what they're hearing to help, like, oh, I'm hearing that. Oh, I'm hearing this. Those those aren't the same thing. That's interesting. There's some kind of communication problem here. If someone had two coaches, I think I would want them to talk so that they could also triangulate. I think I prefer to have one coach per person, not two, just because things were not lost in context if that one person had both set of skills adequately. But the thing about coaching is it takes engagement to have success on it. Both obviously for the coach, but for the person who's being coached. And some change is easy, but if it was easy, you probably would have done it yourself already without the coach. So you should expect some of this stuff is going to take a little time, and some of this stuff is going to be hard. Some will be just, oh, you've been given perspective by the coach, and that's sufficient, and that's enough to make the change. But you should expect some iteration. So having two coaches will expect more simultaneously, and so be thoughtful about it. Depends who the coach is going to be. Sorry, that was not a succinct answer, but I would be thoughtful. But I think I'd prefer one coach who can think about, here's all of the things that are going on, and here's how they should be ordered.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you as well there. I always say to my clients that most of the work should happen between the coaching sessions, because the sessions are about raising awareness and creating actions, and then it's about going away and doing them and seeing what happens. And sometimes those things are not as easy or not successful, and then the client can bring those back, and then we can have another iteration. But I imagine it could get confusing with multiple coaches in knowing there could even be potential conflicts between the kind of actions created. So
yeah.
All right, I will mark that one as done. Another great question. So Manonia, I don't know how I pronounce that. Manonia, I guess. I'm currently working on my development plan, and I'm wondering, what should one focus on to move on from director of engineering to CTO? What does one do more of or less of? Another great question.
I think the answer to this question depends on, what does a CTO mean to you? Right? It's not a well-defined job. Some CTOs are the person that translates between the strategy and the execution on technology. It's a perfectly fine definition. Some are the best technologist in the room, maybe the best coder or the best architect or something like that. Some are effectively the way I consider a VP of engineering, that is just about, how do I get the team to execute best? And so I think you first ask yourself, what kind of CTO do I want to be? What does that perfect job look like for me? And then you can say, here are those skills that I have. Here's the skills that I don't have. And how do I achieve them? You might achieve them by modifying your current position to stress yourself in those things you don't know so well. Maybe you find a mentor, maybe you find a coach who will help you through that journey. Maybe you find a different job that stresses you, that helps you get there. But I think it fundamentally starts if you want to be a CTO. But let's dig in let's not be so Talmudic about it. Let's dig in with a couple different cases. So in the first case, if you want to be the CTO, is the translation layer, then you need to, I'm assuming you have good technical skills. Can you describe technology to non-technologists? Can you state in 2 sentences into a way that your father or your mother or your cousin who's a stockbroker will be able to understand and get? And then can you go and from the strategy standpoint, do the translation the other way and say, here's where the business is. Here's why it's there. Here's what the business wants to be when it grows up. And we have to take multiple steps to do that. Here's what we're going to do, and here's why. Because here's what their customers want. Here's what's in the market. Can you do that translation? That's one way. If you're the VP of Engineering plus, what do you know about methodologies? And those methodologies are not just about software development methodologies, but they might be about recruiting and retention and any number of things. And can you practically apply them? If you are the smartest technologist in the room, what technologies are coming up in strategic that are changing the way product is developed, software is developed? And are you up to speed on them so that you can then implement the next thing for the company, right? So the role, what you want to do changes based on those three archetypes of CTOs, and there's others as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points there. And I guess I'm thinking if this move is within the same company, then what's likely to happen is the transition is going to involve less technology and more business. So exactly as you say, explaining things in more everyday language. So I guess the expectation might be to improve your interpersonal skills, listening what the other people at your C-level want to hear, what their challenges are, and helping them solve them, rather than learning more about technology. I mean, I often find that migrating to a CTO role is quite hard because of the things that people have to let go or delegate, and delegating them correctly and feeling confident in that can cause some angst. So those might be other things to consider.
I think that's a great point about letting go. People fall back on things they're comfortable with frequently, not just people that want to be CTO, but what is it I'm no longer going to do that I'm going to delegate? I think that's a great point, Dan. And what am I going to give up might be as important of a question as what is it that I'm going to do that I've never done before.
All right, so I hope that was a helpful answer. Right, we have a couple more questions. Hang on, what's going on here? Oh dear, no one's voting. All right, David, can you see them both? Which one would you like to answer?
I can. Boy, I like both these questions. I'll just do it top down. The first one is, if there isn't a budget for a coach, where can a CTO find support? Well, Dan, would you like to make this an advertisement for CTO Craft's mentoring circles?
Yes, mentoring circles is a great one, but also even as a member of CTO Craft, there's a Get Help channel. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but I see that has a lot of traffic, and there's all sorts of questions being asked there. Ask for help. So that's a free way, and you could be part of the community and help other people. So. Yeah.
Sometimes you'll see me in those channels answering questions, and sometimes you'll see me asking questions there as well. So you should definitely partake of that. But look at the circles. I'm also on the board of the LA CTO Forum, which is a not-for-profit where CTOs, we used to meet in person back in the before times. But now it's also online. But there's other groups as well. Yeah, someone just wrote the Slack community is amazing. You should definitely partake in that. That's what I would suggest. So,
yeah.
Should I read the next one?
Yep, go ahead. Yep.
Oh, Andrew just posted the URL for the community. So.
Yeah, there's the Ask for Help channel. The general channel also has quite a few related things, and then there's all sorts of specific ones if you have a question about management or leadership or hiring process. So yeah, dig in. There's a little button when you get in about somewhere about adding channels, which you might not see. It's a little bit hidden. I think if you hover over channels, you see a little plus where you can add channels, and then you can see the full list of channels. There's quite often specific ones that might answer. Well, talk about the kind of things you want.
So,
All
okay.
right.
Do you want to pick which question to do next? Or
there's another one coming. And as I said,
yeah.
I mean, I'll also put my details at the end. So if you have a trouble finding the right channel, then drop me a line. Right, let's have a look. Let's go with Anne's one there about, tell us more about how a CEO that's a sales guy might create a cultural problem that can't be easily fixed.
The biggest issue I see here is, I just need this feature to close this sale, is the answer to everything. And so what you end up doing is you tend to have a very, very responsive organization that's building a product for customers and not the market. And that tends to look like a professional services company. And the code tends to be unscalable, and the conversation about tech debt never happens. And eventually the cruft of one-off architectures and one-off code gets to be quite expensive. Engineering slows down. People say, well, this used to be much faster when we were smaller. Why can't this be fast still? And then the CEO says, there must be something wrong with you guys. And you have to do things differently. Now, engineering, there's other reasons engineering can slow down, and some of them are unnecessary. So I don't want to put all slowdown in engineering on the CEO, but there are cases where the CEO is asking the engineering team to go from A to B to C quite quickly, and looking at, I'm just trying to close this sale and that sale and that sale, and over time, it tends not to be sustainable. As opposed to, we believe that the market wants this, that's represented by these customers. And so we want to build these features, and that tends to be a more strategic view. And so the cultural problem is, you've built a culture that is very, very responsive to the loudest voice in the room, but not responsive to, here's what we want the company to be 2 years from now.
And I wanted to ask you, related to that, David, being more strategic and adding features sounds great, but firstly, how do you choose the ones that are going to be most valuable? And secondly, how do you even know if they were the most valuable? Because quite often features get added, but you don't really know which ones move the dial on sales or income.
Yes. So the answer here is different for a B2B company and a B2C company. In a B2C company, it's much generally easier to track. Here's what the usage is, and and that, frankly, I mean, to be fair, that might talk about the reduction in churn more than new sales, right? Because the thing that brings you here and the key thing that keeps you here might be different. But you could even measure that to say, here are the features that people use in the beginning, and here are features that people use over time. And you can talk about switching cost and stickiness and things like that. In B2B, it's harder, right? Because you don't have a direct tie to usage and to people deciding to use it and the consumer. Here is where a place where product really, really needs to team well with marketing and sales. They need to survey what's the market, what customers the market say they want, and how that compares to what makes them close a sale. And the relationship, before I talk about the relationship between product management and engineering being really important, and that needing to be tight, this becomes you want to have a tight relationship with all your colleagues, but it becomes more profound and more important in a B2B company where there's an intermediary between the product and the user, which is the sales channel. Mm-hmm. And so I had a VP of sales that I worked with who used to come to me and say, we really need this feature. We really need this feature.
They all say that.
They all say that, right? But this guy's name was Andrew. I would say to him, well, why? And he would invariably say, well, we've got to close this sale. It's a big sale. And we actually set a bar that if the potential revenue for the sale was over X, we would drop things. This goes back to the sales-driven CEO. We would drop things to do it. And if it wasn't, we wouldn't. And then after each quarter, we would evaluate how many of these things that we were asked actually achieved a sale, and did that sale yield the kind of revenue that was expected, right? And so that's interesting to avoid the, it's free to me, I'm the salesperson, and if I sell it, I make money, and if I don't, well, the cost was on engineering, right? But it also allows perspective on how should we think about this from a product management standpoint. Now, all of this requires a level of trust between the person who runs sales and the person who runs product and the person who runs engineering, and common goal. So it is sometimes hard in a B2B company to know which features will cause the sale, especially if there's 5 features. But I suggest the following thing. I hinted at this before. Everything on the roadmap should be there for a reason. The reason should be explicit. And the reason should look something like, we believe by doing this feature for this type of user, that user will achieve this outcome. And we will know it when we see this metric move. Mm-hmm. The idea is that our job is to create customers. Drucker said this. Peter Drucker said this. Our job is to create customers. Revenue and profitability is a side effect of that. The conversation that you want to have is, are we creating more customers over time of the type of customers we want? Mm-hmm. And that's everything on the roadmap should have that. So back to the other part of the question is, how do we know whether we've achieved that? Let's look at the things that we've released. A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, your latency may vary, and see, did we actually get the goals for the customer we wanted? Did we see the metrics move? Mm-hmm. And if we didn't, what did we learn? Let's retro it. And if we did, what did we learn? Let's retro it. Both are interesting. Mm-hmm. We're not going to get them all right. That's okay. But we want to get better at that over time.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thanks, David. All right, we have one more question. So really insightful discussion. So we're doing a good job. Here we go. There's already some feedback for us. When you're building and sharing a roadmap with the product team, do you have any advice on how to help the wider company understand it's different to a project plan, e.g. in relation to your earlier point about efficacy of features built might not mean ready for the customer. Features.
Yes.
Ready for the customer. Shouldn't pass it.
Yeah. So so first I suggest that, epic statement that I just mentioned, we believe we're going to doing this feature for this customer, we'll have this value for them, we'll say. So that's the first thing, that to be very thoughtful about what's on the roadmap. Second is there's a Jedi mind trick, which I think is very important. Don't show them the roadmap when it's done. Mm-hmm. The things you're going to build. You need to engage with them, and you're going to engage with them for 2 reasons. One is they know some things you don't know. All of the departments know things you don't know. The CFO might know what the cash position of the company is, and therefore how much you can invest in long-term versus mid-term versus shorter term. They might know things about market conditions and broad market conditions. Hey, we're about to enter a recession. I just read this morning US GDP went down 0.2% last quarter, for instance. That has implications. Your CFO might know that better. Your salesperson knows things. Your marketing person knows things. You want to ask them because they know things. But the Jedi mind trick is by engaging them in this conversation, they're going to become supporters of the roadmap as well. When I do roadmaps, I walk it around to each of the executives and say, here's stuff I'm thinking about. What do you think? What do you know? So they've already signed off on it before it's presented to all the executives. Now, so that's one thing. Second is, and this is like, what is it to be a CTO? At some point, you need to stand up in front of the company and say, and you'll probably do this with the chief product officer jointly, holding hands, hugging, whatever it is you do, and say, here are the things that we are planning to do for the next couple quarters. Pick your time frame, and here's why. And some of them are going to be product features, and some of those are going to be enabling features you're doing in engineering. But you need to be able to, you need to explain the rest of the company, because it's not just that you don't want battles with the other executives. You want to win not just the minds of the company, but their hearts too. Here's why we're important as a company. Here's how we're delivering value. Here's what you can tell your mom when you go home, right? And so you need to present them. And that thing about the CTO being a translation layer, this is where it's really important.
All right. Thank you, David. So we've answered all the questions from the audience, and we have a few minutes left. Based on what you came to talk us about, anything else you'd like to share with us in the last few minutes?
We've talked, it occurs to me, we've talked a lot about how a CTO walks about the world and how they engage with what they do, how they engage with their colleagues. But there's an important thing about how they engage with themselves. Do you love technology? Like, does this stuff, get you up at night? One of my, I still think about Armstrong walking on the moon. Like, I'm older than I'm assuming most of this audience is. It was actually maybe it's my first memory. I was a little teeny kid, and I was in my stepmother's parents' house, and I remember Armstrong walking on the moon. First step. I was in Scarsdale, New York. I can tell you exactly what the room looked like. Fundamentally, I said, I want to do something with science, right? I found out later what I really want to do something with engineering. There's a difference. But how does it you feel about your job? Are you motivated to learn this stuff every day? What are you learning? What's cool, right? Are you talking with your peers? What does GCP have that looks like the updates on the cold start problem on AWS? How are they thinking about that? Is that interesting to you? Like, it should be. It should be. Find yourself an outlet to do that, as well as understanding the business. And by the way, spend some time outdoors or something else, right? Go have a life. All those things are important. So.
All right, great. Well, let's see. We have one last question. All right. So we just have time. In case we're running out of questions, and any tips for an experienced CTO how to work successfully with a much less experienced CEO founder? Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a good question. It depends how much humility the much less CEO founder has. Is this person who thinks that they're the next Steve Jobs? Or is this a person who wants to be your partner? I know the current number of Steve Jobs in the universe. There used to be one. So some of them think they're the next Steve Jobs and can't be dissuaded. Often those people are also sometimes scared. How can you help them from what your experience is on things that might be outside your purview? Oh, I've been in board meetings before. What's going, here's something that the board might be asking about. I've been thinking about that. Could I be helpful here? Try to be helpful. Try to be your coach to your CEO in ways that that CEO finds helpful. Where someone has more humility, then you can probably face the problem directly. Look, I see we're having this business problem. Is there a way that I could help the VP? What do you think about me helping the VP of sales in this? How do you think me best approaching them? But think of, to the extent that you can be helpful to the CEO and things outside your purview, then sometimes age can be a benefit. By the way, sometimes a younger person might see an older person as they don't understand it. Like the world is different now. But it's finding that area. It's finding the same thing with the person who micromanages, finding that small area that you can do a little more than they actually thought you can do, a little more than asked for, and providing value there. And then the relationship tends to open up.
All right.
I want to spend a minute before we go. I want to, if I mentioned before, and Dan, I know you feel this way too. I mentioned before the 4 things we do. If anybody just wants to chat, just ring me up, right? So it's the deep dive, looking at product management engineering. It's the coaching we've talked about. It's the fractional CTO, Chief Product Officer worker due diligence. If anybody wants to know about how any of that stuff works and to just have a conversation about, just like we're here to be helpful. You can hit me up on the Slack group, but also email is generally the easiest.
All right. I've just shared the details there.
Lovely.
In the chat, so everyone's got those. So thank you very much, David, for joining us today. It's been a great discussion, and certainly I've learned a lot, and I hope others have too. Certainly we had some feedback that the conversations have been useful. So looking forward to speaking with you again. I see there's another couple of questions come in, but maybe they can be posted on the Slack channel and we can pick them up there. You can always tag David or me. But if not, see you again next time. Please sign up using the CTO Craft to join the community, and then you will enjoy further events. So thanks very much for coming, everyone, and see you next time.
Lovely. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, David.